Good evening. Tonight I would like to reflect on some of the things that I've learned in speech and communication class, as well as talk a little bit about the biblical perspective and principles that I've gained, or the heightened awareness of those principles that I've gained throughout the course. Public speaking, I find, is not really hard for me. I seem to be able to connect with my audience. But preparing and organizing my thoughts outside of my head for everyone else to be able to understand in a logical format has proven to be a challenge. So I enjoy public speaking, but I've learned that it's something I definitely need to work at. One of the first biblical perspectives that I found challenging comes from the book of James, James chapter 3, verses 3 through 5. Now, James happens to be one of my favorite books, and I'll read it now. I'm reading from the New American Standard Version, starting in verse 3, chapter 3 of the book of James. Now, if we put the bit into the horse's mouth so that they may obey us, we direct their entire body as well. Behold, the ship also, though they are so great and are driven by strong winds, are still directed by a very small rudder, whatever the inclination of the pilot desires. So also the tongue is a small part of the body, and yet it boasts of great things. Behold, how great is a forest is set aflame by such a small fire. And it brings me right back to the truth and the reality that the tongue is such an incredibly small part of the body, and yet has the capability of doing such destruction. It's absolutely amazing. And also just the awareness and the understanding that my tongue must be both spirit and self-controlled. That freedom of speech, it was a costly freedom. And it's not government permission to be reckless. With the freedom comes the responsibility to use it wisely and to use it appropriately. My mind also goes to Proverbs, where it says, the power of life and death is in the tongue. When you just stop and you think about that, the power of life and death is in the tongue, it really does sober the believer, I think even more so, to the awareness and to caution us about how we speak and what we say and how we say it, even more importantly. So that biblical perspective, although, being raised in church, I've certainly heard, even the little Sunday school songs, oh, be careful little feet, oh, be careful little words, those things, but when you really stop and think about it and apply it, it's been a very good reminder for me. It's been a very timely reminder for me, and for that I'm grateful. I think the 5 areas that we kind of touched on that have really stuck with me, just listed below from the our text, the confident public speaking, are the being audience-centered. I love these, the logos, the pathos, and the ethos, what they mean, and how each of those can evoke a response, and how they can actually be used to manipulate how people or what people think or feel about a certain subject or thing. And then, of course, having a purpose, understanding why you're delivering the speech and what you're supposed to accomplish when all is said and done. That's also been really important. It's not just talking to talk. There's something there's a goal that needs to be reached at the end of the tunnel, and I think those things are probably what I will personally take away with the 5 best practices. That for me, and as I think about those 5 practices, I'm going into my first speech, which was the informative speech. My favorite out of all. I enjoyed the subject matter, and that made it so much easier talking about the Bible, the books of the Old Testament and how they're congruent. And it went well. Again, the public speaking part is not difficult. It's the preparing and organizing that is a bit more of a struggle for me. I also learned that I was actually really pretty comfortable doing public speaking. I don't think I enjoyed the videoing and posting it on YouTube as much, but just the communicating or conveying information via this format, I really kind of found that despite the videoing made me uncomfortable, the actual doing the speech did not. And so that was kind of a neat learning experience. And then I moved from there into my demonstration speech, which did not go as well as I had hoped. I definitely ran into some difficulties. I didn't have a camera person, and so I felt very limited to to the angles and what I could show. But I also found out that I didn't review in the conclusion, and I didn't bring everything back around, and I didn't tie it up neatly. I basically presented very solid information, but I didn't put it all together in a nice, neat little package at the end and say, here is the demonstration. And so that was an area that I really tried to work on for my persuasive speech. Now, the persuasive speech for me personally had to probably be the most difficult, and not necessarily because of subject matter, but it was more knowing how hard to push, how far to push, using facts but not trying to be guilting and manipulative with those facts, trying to evoke a response, because certainly a call to action is required in a persuasive speech. So you want folks to respond, but I didn't want to be over the top. I didn't want to push too hard. And again, this is where the ethos and the pathos and the logos really sort of started to gel in my head and become something that I look for even in just an everyday being. But the persuasive speech was the most difficult for me, trying to walk those lines and find those balances. I was able to kind of put together a little bit better conclusion. However, again, it wasn't tied up as neatly and presented in a nice, clean package the way it really could have been. So that's truly an area that I'm going to have to continue to improve on even after class is over. Now, speaking of class being over, how do I plan to use this? Well, I have to be honest with you, I'm using some of it already just in everyday. Just being aware of being aware of my words. That again, the power of life and death is in my tongue. Trying to allow that to sink in just in my everyday conversation, let alone in any kind of formal presentation that I may have to do in the future. So, believe it or not, this is playing out even in my everyday. And I think also too, having the steps to know how to prepare and put the PowerPoint together in a more clean and organized way, how to make sure I am wrapping things up in a nice, neat package and presenting something that can be logical and followed and understood while still being myself. And so that, I think, is that's how I plan to use it. Opportunities to present, whether in church, for ministry, or even at work, I think I'd be a little bit more willing to jump on and go with that now. I have a reputation for being a bit of a winger, and that is, yeah, I had to speak at my brother's funeral, for example, and my roommate kept asking me, do you know what you want to say? And I'm like, yeah, I know what I want to say. But I had nothing written down. I had nothing prepared. One of the big takeaways for me is that I can speak from my heart, but I can do it in a logical and orderly fashion. And the organization doesn't make it any less me. And that's been a huge, huge takeaway for me. So, now let's review real quick. I need to prepare. I need to organize my thoughts better. I need to stay audience-centered. I need to understand the purpose of the speech. And I love using wisely the ethos, the logos, and the pathos. For me, this has been an awesome experience. Thank you. And Merry Christmas.